The impact was worse than Ethan Kane anticipated. When the console on his starfighter lit up with a symphony of blaring alarms, and the holographic AI politely informed him, "Structural integrity is at 8%. You're probably going to die," he figured he had at least a few minutes to formulate a plan. Instead, the violent gravity of Charuz had other ideas. He came to with the bitter tang of blood in his mouth and the distinct realization that his face was firmly planted in the cockpit's cracked display. The acrid smell of burnt circuitry stung his nostrils as smoke curled lazily from the wreckage around him. "Ugh," he groaned, spitting out a broken piece of something that might have been a tooth or possibly a button from his jacket. Well, that could have gone better. Ethan fumbled with the release on his harness, which had decided to play the part of a clingy ex, refusing to let go. After a few futile tugs and a whispered promise to never again complain about the seatbelt light on commercial flights, he finally managed to free himself. He tumbled out of the cockpit and landed unceremoniously on the alien soil below. The ground was warm and coarse beneath his gloves, a deep red that shimmered as if dusted with microscopic gems. In the distance, jagged black spires rose like broken teeth against a bruised orange sky. "Not exactly the vacation spot I had in mind," Ethan muttered, checking his gear. His rifle was intact, though his comm unit was toast, and the emergency beacon he activated seemed to blink with all the enthusiasm of a dying firefly. He stood and surveyed the wreckage, muttering under his breath, "Okay, step 1, don't die. Step 2, find something edible. Step 3. He glanced around at the desolate expanse. "Find someone who doesn't want to eat me." The silence pressed on him, unnerving and vast. It was the kind of quiet that made you feel like the universe was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. It happened when he found the footprints. They were large, much larger than his, and deeply imprinted in the crimson dust. He crouched down to examine them, noting the odd four-toed shape and the faint iridescent shimmer left in their wake. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old either. "Well, that's not ominous at all," Ethan said aloud, because talking to yourself was an underrated survival strategy when faced with possible death by alien. He followed the trail, his boots crunching softly against the ground. Every now and then, he swore he could hear something, a faint rustle, the sound of distant wind, but when he paused to listen, it was gone. The trail led him to the ruins. Massive stone structures loomed ahead, carved with intricate patterns that glowed faintly in the fading light. Vines with pulsing bioluminescent tendrils wrapped around the pillars, their eerie blue light casting shifting shadows. It looked ancient, yet somehow alive, as though the ruins themselves were breathing. "Hello?" Ethan called out, his voice echoing off the walls. He wasn't sure what he expected. A response, perhaps, or maybe an ambush. What he didn't expect was the sudden appearance of a figure, stepping out from the shadows with an unsettling grace. She was tall, taller than him by a good head, and her skin shimmered like liquid silver, shifting with hues of deep purple and gold as she moved. Her eyes, large and luminescent, seemed to pierce through him, and her expression was one of measured curiosity. Ethan's first thought was that she looked like a goddess from some forgotten myth. His second thought was, "I hope she doesn't kill me." "You are injured," she said, her voice melodic, but edged with something he couldn't quite place. "Yeah, you could say that," Ethan replied, raising a hand to his split forehead. "But you should see the other guy. Or, spaceship." Her head tilted slightly, and he couldn't tell if she was amused or confused. "I am Virelin," she said after a moment. "You should not be here." "Tell me about it," Ethan muttered. "Look, I just need some help fixing my comm unit. Then I'll be out of your hair, assuming you have hair under that fancy hood." She regarded him in silence, and for a moment, Ethan wondered if he'd offended her. Then her lips quirked upward, just enough to suggest a smile. "You are not leaving," she said simply. The statement was so matter-of-fact that it took Ethan a moment to process. What? You will stay, Varellin repeated, stepping closer. It is necessary. Her gaze locked onto his, and for the first time, Ethan felt a prickle of unease. He had faced plasma storms, rogue AI drones, and even a particularly irate space pirate, but there was something about this woman, alien, whatever, that unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. Look, Varellin, he began carefully. I appreciate the hospitality, but I've got people waiting for me. Command's probably losing their minds right now. Her smile didn't waver. There is no command here. No one will come for you. Ethan's mouth went dry. Okay, that's ominous. He forced a chuckle, hoping to lighten the mood. What are you, the galaxy's most aggressive Airbnb host? Varellin's head tilted again, her expression unreadable. I do not know what that means, but you are amusing. Glad I could entertain, Ethan muttered. She extended a hand, the motion smooth and deliberate. Come. You will need food and rest. Ethan hesitated, every instinct screaming at him to keep his distance, but as he glanced back at the wreckage of his starfighter, he realized he didn't have much of a choice. With a resigned sigh, he took her hand. Her touch was surprisingly warm, and as she led him deeper into the ruins, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just taken the first step into something far bigger and far stranger than he could imagine. Ethan woke to the sound of something humming. At first, he thought it was the faint vibration of his comm unit springing back to life, until he realized it was accompanied by a rhythmic clicking, like someone tapping their nails on glass. Groggy, he cracked open one eye to find Varellin perched on a ledge, her long fingers tracing glowing lines on what looked like a floating tablet made of light. The ethereal display shifted and shimmered as she worked, her face set in a look of intense concentration. Morning, Ethan croaked, his voice rough from sleep. She didn't look up. It is not morning. Ethan glanced around the cavernous room she'd led him to the night before. The bioluminescent vines coiled around the walls provided a dim, perpetual glow that made it impossible to tell the time. Right. Thanks for the update. Space clock. Now. She glanced at him, her lips twitching in what he was beginning to suspect was the alien equivalent of a smirk. You slept for 7 hours and 13 minutes, she said, her tone mildly impressed. A remarkably inefficient use of time. Glad you think so, Ethan grumbled, sitting up and wincing as his sore muscles protested. We humans are big fans of inefficiency. It's like our whole thing. Varellin tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. Your species continues to perplex me. Yeah, we get that a lot. He swung his legs over the edge of the makeshift bed, a flat stone slab covered with something that felt suspiciously like moss, and stretched. The movement sent a sharp twinge through his shoulder, reminding him of the crash. So, what are you working on? He asked, nodding toward her glowing tablet. Varellin hesitated for a fraction of a second before the display vanished with a flick of her hand. Nothing that concerns you. Great. Love being in the loop, Ethan muttered, but before he could press further, his stomach growled loudly enough to echo off the walls. Varellin's gaze flicked to his midsection. You are hungry. Very perceptive, Ethan said dryly. Got any alien breakfast lying around? She rose with the kind of fluid grace that made him feel like a clumsy toddler in comparison, and gestured for him to follow. Come. As they walked, Ethan couldn't help but notice the intricate carvings that adorned every surface of the ruins. The patterns glowed faintly, shifting like ripples in water as they passed. So these designs, he began, hoping to strike up some kind of conversation. Are they art? Or like alien graffiti? Varellin glanced over her shoulder, her expression faintly amused. They are neither. The glyphs are alive. Ethan stopped in his tracks. Alive? Like sentient? No. She paused, her head tilting slightly as if considering how to explain. They are responsive to energy, biological, electrical, cosmic. They record and adapt to the presence of those who inhabit this place. Great, Ethan muttered, eyeing the glowing walls warily. So I'm being watched by glowing wallpaper. That's not creepy at all. Varellan's lips quirked in that almost smile again, but she said nothing as they entered a larger chamber. The center of the room was dominated by a strange, circular apparatus. It looked like a cross between a fountain and a holographic projector, with streams of shimmering liquid light flowing upward into the air, where they formed a constantly shifting orb. "Behold," Varellan said with a touch of dramatic flair, "the sustenance synthesizer." Ethan stared at the contraption. "You're telling me that thing makes food?" "Yes." "Well, that's convenient." He stepped closer, squinting at the swirling orb of light. "So, how does it work?" Varellan raised a hand and placed her palm against a nearby panel. The orb shifted colors, and a small, flat object materialized on a nearby pedestal. She picked it up and handed it to Ethan. It was a square. A perfectly smooth, translucent square that looked like someone had tried to make jello out of glass. "What's this?" Ethan asked, holding it up to the light. "Food," Varellan replied. "This is food?" He gave it an experimental sniff. It smelled faintly of nothing. "What does it taste like?" "Nutrition." Ethan stared at her, deadpan. "That's not a flavor." Varellan crossed her arms, her shimmering skin catching the light in a way that made her look entirely too smug. "It is sufficient." Sighing, Ethan took a tentative bite. The texture was somewhere between a gummy bear and rubber, and the flavor was... Well, Varellan wasn't wrong. It didn't taste like food so much as it tasted like the concept of food. "Delicious," he said flatly, forcing it down. Varellan raised an eyebrow. "You are difficult to please." "Hey, I'm just saying," Ethan said, holding up the remaining square. "If you ever want to open a restaurant, you might want to workshop the menu." To his surprise, Varellan actually laughed, a soft melodic sound that echoed through the chamber. "You amuse me, human," she said, her gaze softening slightly. "Glad I could brighten your day," Ethan replied, setting the rest of the square down and brushing his hands off. "Now, about my comm unit." Varellan's expression sobered, and she gestured for him to follow her again. They returned to the chamber where he'd woken up, and Varellan produced his broken comm unit, which she had apparently been examining in his absence. "It is primitive," she said, holding it up like it was a particularly unremarkable rock. "Gee, thanks," Ethan muttered. "Can you fix it?" Varellan tilted her head, studying the device. "Perhaps, but I see little point." "What do you mean, little point?" Ethan asked, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "This thing is my only way off this planet." Varellan's gaze met his, and there was a flicker of something he couldn't quite identify, sadness maybe, or regret. "You will not leave," she said softly. "It is not your time." Ethan threw up his hands. "Great. Thanks for the cryptic fortune cookie wisdom." She didn't respond, simply turning and walking away, leaving him alone with his thoughts and a growing sense of unease. As he sat down to examine the comm unit himself, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Varellan knew far more than she was letting on, and that her insistence on keeping him here wasn't just about survival. Ethan sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor, his comm unit splayed out in pieces before him. The delicate circuits and wires mocked him with their fragility, the tiny tools in his repair kit clumsy in his hands. "Come on," he muttered, poking at a particularly stubborn connector. "Work with me here. I just need you to blink. Just one little—" The comm unit sparked violently, sending a puff of acrid smoke into his face. Ethan recoiled, coughing and waving his hand. "Perfect. Exactly what I needed. Thanks, universe." Varellan, seated nearby with her legs folded beneath her, glanced up from her intricate weaving. Thin, glowing strands of energy flowed from her fingertips, forming patterns in the air that shimmered like holograms. She studied him with a bemused expression. "Your persistence is admirable," she said, her voice carrying that faintly teasing lilt he was beginning to recognize. even if it is misplaced. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Ethan shot back, glaring at the lifeless comm unit. Maybe if I had a magic light loom like you, I'd get somewhere. Virelin raised an elegant eyebrow. This is not magic. It is a technique passed down through generations of my people. The threads are part of the ether, the underlying energy that binds the universe. Sure, Ethan said, waving a hand. Ether, universe energy, blah blah. All I know is that it looks cool, and I'm stuck with duct tape and a prayer. Duct tape? Virelin repeated, tilting her head. Ethan opened his mouth to explain, then thought better of it. Never mind. It's a human thing. Virelin's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before she turned back to her weaving. Perhaps you would make more progress if you focused on the present rather than dwelling on escape. The words stung more than he cared to admit. Ethan wasn't used to feeling powerless, and Virelin's cryptic demeanor didn't help. She acted as though she knew something he didn't, as though she were privy to some cosmic secret he wasn't allowed to share. What exactly are you working on over there? He asked, more to distract himself than out of genuine curiosity. Virelin's hands moved with practiced precision, the glowing threads twisting and looping into an intricate lattice. This is a memory weave. It contains fragments of my people's history, encoded in light and sound. Ethan frowned, leaning forward slightly. History? Like a recording? Not precisely, Virelin replied. It is more immersive. The weave does not merely tell the story. It allows one to experience it. That piqued his interest. Experience it how? Virelin hesitated, her hands pausing mid-motion. Then, with a flick of her fingers, she sent the completed weave floating toward him. It hovered in the air between them, its glowing strands pulsing faintly. Touch it, she said softly. Ethan eyed the weave warily. This isn't going to zap me, is it? Virelin's lips twitched. Not unless you resist. That's reassuring, Ethan muttered, but his curiosity got the better of him. Slowly, he reached out and brushed his fingers against the glowing strands. The world around him vanished. In its place was a sprawling city of towers and bridges, gleaming with the same bioluminescent light that permeated the ruins. The air buzzed with energy, and the streets were alive with tall, shimmering figures like Virelin, their laughter and chatter weaving a symphony of sound. Ethan was no longer himself. He was someone, or something, else, moving through the crowd with a sense of purpose. Memories that weren't his flickered through his mind, the pride of building something enduring, the joy of connection, the quiet confidence of a people who believed they had mastered the stars. And then, just as abruptly, it all shattered. Fire rained from the sky, towers crumbled, bridges collapsed, and the symphony turned to screams. Ethan's chest tightened as he felt the searing pain of loss, the overwhelming grief of watching everything crumble. He tried to move to help, but he was frozen in place, a helpless observer. When the vision ended, he was back in the cavern, gasping for breath. Virelin watched him with a somber expression. Now you understand. Ethan rubbed his temples, his head pounding. Understand what? That your people had it rough? Yeah, I got that memo loud and clear. It is more than that, Virelin said, her voice gentle but insistent. The fall of my people was not merely a tragedy, it was a warning. We sought to control the ether, to bend it to our will. In doing so, we brought about our own destruction. Ethan frowned. What does that have to do with me? Virelin's gaze bore into him, her luminous eyes filled with an intensity that made him uneasy. The threads of the ether are not random, Ethan. They connect all things, binding us to paths we cannot see. You are here for a reason. He shook his head, laughing humorlessly. Great. So I'm the galaxy's unluckiest tourist. Thanks for the pep talk. Virelin didn't laugh. Instead, she reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was surprisingly warm, almost comforting. "You dismiss what you do not understand," she said softly. "But the threads have chosen you. Whether you like it or not, you are part of this story now." Ethan wanted to argue, to deny her words, but something in her tone silenced him. Instead, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Fine," he muttered, "but if I'm stuck in this cosmic soap opera, I'm going to need better food." That nutrition block thing was an insult to taste buds everywhere. Varellan's lips curved into a faint smile. "I will see what I can do." As she turned back to her weaving, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn into something far bigger than himself. The ruins, the prophecy, the enigmatic woman who refused to let him leave. They were all threads in a tapestry he couldn't yet see, and whether he liked it or not, he was tangled in it. Ethan wandered through the cavernous ruins, his boots scuffing against the smooth stone floor. Varellan had told him to stay put, while she consulted the veil, which he assumed was her fancy way of saying she needed some alone time to do more glowing, mystical alien stuff. "Don't touch anything," she'd added sternly before leaving, which naturally only made Ethan want to touch everything. The walls pulsed faintly with that living energy she'd described, their glyphs shifting as if responding to his presence. It was both mesmerizing and unnerving, like being watched by a very judgmental lava lamp. "All right, space ruins," he muttered, glancing around. "What's your deal? Got any secrets you want to share with the class?" As if in answer, a faint hum filled the air. Ethan froze, every instinct telling him he'd probably just triggered some kind of ancient death trap. "Varellan?" he called, his voice echoing. "If this is your idea of a prank, it's not funny." The hum grew louder, and a section of the wall slid open with a low, grinding noise. Ethan stared, slack-jawed, as a hidden chamber revealed itself. "Well, that's not ominous at all," he muttered, stepping closer despite his better judgment. The room beyond was unlike anything he'd seen so far. Where the rest of the ruins were worn and weathered, this space gleamed as if untouched by time. In the center stood a pedestal, atop which rested a spherical device that glowed faintly with the same otherworldly light as the glyphs. Ethan approached cautiously. "Okay, rule number 1 of sci-fi horror movies, don't mess with the glowing artifact." He stopped a few feet away, hands on his hips, and stared at the sphere. It was about the size of a basketball, its surface covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and ripple like liquid metal. "Rule number 2, he said, wagging a finger at it. "Don't talk to yourself like you're in a sci-fi horror movie. That's how the creepy alien AI knows you're scared." Against his better judgment, he reached out and tapped the sphere lightly with one finger. The reaction was immediate. The sphere lit up, its patterns spinning faster, and a holographic projection filled the room. Ethan stumbled back, shielding his eyes. "Oh great, now I've done it. Here comes the ancient alien apocalypse." But instead of destruction, the hologram resolved into a series of images. Star maps, alien symbols, and, most surprisingly, a human figure. "What the—" Ethan squinted at the projection. The human figure was tall, clad in what looked like a futuristic uniform, and eerily familiar. Before he could process what he was seeing, a voice echoed through the chamber. It was deep, resonant, and entirely too calm for his liking. Designation: Observer 435A. Authorization required. Ethan blinked. Hi? I'm not an observer. Just your friendly neighborhood stranded soldier. No authorization here, sorry." The sphere pulsed as if considering his words. Unknown entity detected, initiating inquiry. "Inquiry? What does that mean?" Ethan asked, taking a wary step back. The hologram shifted, displaying what looked like a timeline. Events played out in rapid succession. Images of Varellan's people, their rise and fall, interspersed with glimpses of the etheric threads she'd mentioned. Ethan tried to keep up, but it was like watching an entire season of a TV show at hyperspeed. "Whoa, slow down. I didn't sign up for the Alien History Channel." The sphere ignored him, focusing instead on a glowing point on the timeline that pulsed in rhythm with his own heartbeat. Temporal anomaly identified. Subject is pivotal to the thread convergence. Ethan frowned. Thread convergence? That doesn't sound ominous at all. Care to elaborate? The hologram shifted again, this time displaying a massive, swirling nexus of energy. It reminded Ethan of a black hole, but instead of darkness, it radiated light. Blinding, infinite light. Convergence represents a critical juncture in universal stability. Subject's presence is required to restore balance. Ethan threw up his hands. Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be? Can't a guy just crash on an alien planet without being drafted into saving the universe? Before the sphere could respond, or complicate his life further, Virelin burst into the chamber, her eyes wide with alarm. "What have you done?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "Me? I didn't do anything," Ethan said, pointing at the sphere. "It's the one playing cosmic PowerPoint." Virelin muttered something in her native language that sounded suspiciously like a curse. She approached the sphere, her hands glowing with etheric energy, and placed them against its surface. The hologram flickered, then vanished. The sphere dimmed, its patterns slowing to a crawl. Virelin turned to Ethan, her expression a mixture of exasperation and concern. "You were not meant to see this." "Yeah, well, it saw me first," Ethan retorted. "Care to explain why it thinks I'm the key to saving the universe?" Virelin hesitated, her gaze flickering to the now dormant sphere. "The convergence is complicated. It is a point where the threads of the ether align, creating a moment of immense power and danger. My people believed it could be harnessed to reshape reality, but they were wrong. It nearly destroyed us." "And now it's my problem?" Ethan asked, incredulous. Virelin met his gaze, her expression solemn. "You are connected to the threads in a way I do not fully understand, but the sphere's activation confirms what I feared. Your presence here is no coincidence." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Great. So I'm not just a stranded soldier. I'm a cosmic errand boy. Awesome." Despite the tension, Virelin's lips twitched in a faint smile. "You have a peculiar way of lightening dire situations." "It's a gift," Ethan said dryly. As they left the chamber, the weight of the revelation settled over him. He didn't fully understand the convergence or his role in it, but one thing was clear. His simple mission of survival had just become infinitely more complicated, and knowing his luck, probably a lot more dangerous. Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor of Virelin's chamber, poking at a glowing strand of etheric energy she had woven into a loose circle. It floated above his lap, humming faintly with an almost musical tone. "This is weird," he said, tilting his head as the strand wriggled like a living thing. "It's like playing with a glowing spaghetti noodle." Virelin stood across from him, her hands folded elegantly in front of her. "That noodle, as you call it, is an extension of the ether itself. It responds to your thoughts, your energy. Treat it with respect." Ethan rolled his eyes but resisted the urge to flick the strand across the room like a rubber band. "Right. Respecting the noodle. Got it." Virelin sighed, though there was a hint of amusement in her glowing eyes. "You are infuriating." "Yeah, well, I get that a lot," Ethan replied, tossing the strand into the air and watching as it reformed itself into a perfect circle. "So, what's the point of this little arts and crafts session? Are we bonding over alien magic, or is this just to keep me distracted?" "It is neither," Virelin said. "This exercise is meant to help you attune to the threads of the ether. If you are to fulfill your role in the convergence, you must learn to harness its power." Ethan snorted. "Power? Lady, I'm just trying to fix my comm unit and get off this planet. I didn't sign up for a cosmic training montage." "The threads have chosen you," Virelin said firmly. "This is not a matter of choice." Ethan let the glowing strand dissipate and leaned back on his hands. "Yeah, about that. What exactly did that sphere mean when it said I was pivotal to this convergence thing? And don't give me the 'it's complicated' speech. I'm done with vague alien riddles." Virelin hesitated, her gaze drifting to the glyph-covered walls. The soft light from the ruins cast an otherworldly glow across her features, making her look almost ethereal. Long ago, she began, my people discovered the convergence, a moment when the threads of the ether align, creating a singularity of infinite potential. We believed it was a gift, an opportunity to reshape reality, to unify the galaxy. But we were blinded by our ambition. She paused, her hands clasping tightly together. We did not understand the cost. The power we sought to control turned against us, unraveling the threads of our existence. Our world was destroyed, and our people scattered to the stars. Ethan frowned. Okay, that sounds bad, but what does that have to do with me? Varellan's gaze met his, her luminous eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sorrow. The prophecy speaks of a soldier from the stars, marked by fire, who will guide the convergence to its true purpose. The threads have brought you here, Ethan. You are the one we have been waiting for. Ethan stared at her, then let out a short, incredulous laugh. You've got the wrong guy. I'm not some prophesied savior. I'm just a grunt with a busted ship and a bad attitude. The threads do not make mistakes, Varellan said softly. Yeah, well, maybe they should get their cosmic eyes checked, Ethan shot back. I'm not exactly hero material. Varellan stepped closer, her expression earnest. You are more than you believe yourself to be. The threads see not just what you are, but what you could become. Ethan rubbed a hand over his face, groaning. This is insane. I can't even fix my comm unit, and you want me to fix the universe? Varellan's lips curved into a faint smile. You underestimate yourself, and you are not alone in this. He raised an eyebrow. Oh, great. Are there more glowing noodle enthusiasts hiding in the ruins, or are you volunteering to be my sidekick? Her smile widened slightly. Sidekick? Hardly. If anything, I am the mentor in this arrangement. Ethan snorted. Well, you've got the cryptic speeches down. Now all you need is a beard to stroke dramatically. Varellan laughed, a soft, melodic sound that eased some of the tension in the air. You are insufferable. And you're stuck with me, Ethan replied with a smirk. The light-hearted moment passed, and Varellan's expression grew serious again. She gestured for him to stand, and as he did, she extended her hand. Come, she said. There is something you must see. Ethan hesitated, then took her hand. Her touch was warm, almost grounding, as she led him through the ruins. They passed through corridors filled with glowing glyphs, their light dimming and brightening as they walked. Eventually, they reached a large chamber unlike any Ethan had seen before. In its center stood a massive crystalline structure, its surface swirling with light and energy. This is the core, Varellan said. It is the heart of the ruins, the nexus of the etheric threads. Ethan stepped closer, his breath catching as he felt the sheer power radiating from the structure. It was both beautiful and terrifying, a reminder of how small he was in the grand scheme of things. The core is connected to the convergence, Varellan explained. It will guide us to the moment when the threads align. Ethan turned to her, his expression skeptical. And then what? I wave my magic noodle and everything's fine? Varellan's lips twitched in a faint smile. It is not so simple. The convergence is unpredictable, and its outcome depends on the choices we make. Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. No pressure, right? Varellan placed a hand on his shoulder, her gaze steady. I believe in you, Ethan. The threads have brought you here for a reason. Together, we will face whatever lies ahead. Ethan looked at her, then back at the core. He didn't fully understand the convergence or his role in it, but one thing was clear. He couldn't back out now. All right, he said, his tone resigned but determined. Let's do this. But if I'm saving the universe, I'm going to need a better name than the guy with the noodle. Varellan laughed, the sound echoing through the chamber. For the first time since his crash, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could find his place in this tangled web of threads and prophecies. Ethan groaned as he rubbed his shoulder, which was still sore from his latest training session with Varellan. She insisted it was necessary to prepare him for the convergence, but to Ethan, it felt more like boot camp with bonus glowing noodles. You could have warned me that the ether threads would smack back, Ethan grumbled, wincing as he flexed his arm. Virelin, sitting cross-legged on a hovering disk of light, tilted her head at him. The threads respond to imbalance in your energy. Perhaps if you stopped treating them as toys, they would not retaliate. Retaliate? They're strings of glowing spaghetti, not attack drones. Ethan gestured toward a faintly shimmering strand that floated innocuously nearby. I barely touched it, and bam, smack to the face. Virelin's lips twitched in amusement. Perhaps they sense your intentions. The ether is not merely energy, it is alive in a way. Great. Sentient noodles, Ethan muttered, just when I thought this couldn't get weirder. Despite his complaints, Ethan had to admit there was something fascinating about the ether. The threads weren't just light. They felt alive, vibrating with a faint hum that seemed to resonate with his own heartbeat. All right, he said, sitting back down on the cold stone floor of the ruins. Let's try this again. He extended his hand toward one of the threads, focusing on the way it floated and pulsed in the air. This time, he resisted the urge to poke it and instead let his hand hover near it. Slowly, the thread drifted toward him, wrapping around his fingers like a curious creature. Hey, look at that, Ethan said, grinning. I didn't get smacked this time. Virelin nodded approvingly. You are beginning to understand. The ether responds to intent as much as action. Approach it with respect and it will aid you. Ethan twirled the thread between his fingers, marveling at the way it seemed to shimmer with every movement. So, this is the big secret to saving the universe? Playing nice with space noodles? Virelin rolled her eyes. The ether is far more complex than you give it credit for. It binds all things together. Matter, energy, even time itself. To wield it is to touch the fabric of reality. Ethan raised an eyebrow. And yet here I am, using it to make glow-in-the-dark cat's cradles. Before Virelin could respond, the chamber around them shuddered, a deep rumble echoing through the ruins. Ethan jumped to his feet, his hand instinctively going to the sidearm holstered at his hip. What the hell was that? He asked, scanning the room. Virelin stood as well, her expression tense. Something has disturbed the core. The walls around them pulsed with light, the glyphs flickering erratically. The once steady hum of the ether grew louder, more chaotic. Disturbed? By what? Ethan demanded. Virelin closed her eyes, her hands glowing as she reached out to the threads around them. A moment later, her eyes snapped open, and her expression darkened. We are not alone, she said. Ethan's stomach sank. Not alone as in, someone activated the ancient security system, or not alone as in, there's a bunch of angry aliens headed our way? Neither, Virelin said grimly. It is worse. Before Ethan could ask what could possibly be worse, a section of the chamber wall slid open, revealing a figure shrouded in darkness. Its silhouette was humanoid, but its movements were unnaturally smooth, almost mechanical. Okay, I take it back, Ethan said, drawing his sidearm. That's definitely worse. The figure stepped into the light, revealing a sleek, metallic body adorned with glowing lines of energy. Its head was featureless, save for a single, pulsing eye in the center of its face. Intruders detected, it intoned, its voice cold and emotionless. Designate, anomaly, termination required. Ethan groaned. Why is it always termination? Can't we ever get a welcome to the ruins, please enjoy your stay? The machine raised an arm, and a beam of light shot toward them. Ethan dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast. Virelin, tell me you've got a plan, he shouted, scrambling behind a column for cover. Virelin extended her hands, summoning threads of ether that lashed out like whips. They struck the machine, but it barely flinched, its energy shield absorbing the impact. The core's defenses have been activated, she said, her voice strained. It will not stop until we are eliminated. Ethan peeked out from behind the column and fired his sidearm, the energy bolts ricocheting harmlessly off the machine's shield. Fantastic, he muttered. It's got plot armor. The machine turned toward him, its single eye glowing brighter. Ethan scrambled to his feet, his mind racing. The ruins were a maze of interconnected chambers. Maybe he could lead it away from the core. "Virelin," he called. "Can you shut it down from here?" She shook her head. "Not while it is active. Its connection to the core is too strong." "Great. Guess it's time for Plan B." "What is Plan B?" Virelin asked, her tone skeptical. Ethan grinned. "Run like hell and hope it follows me." Before Virelin could protest, he bolted out of the chamber, shouting over his shoulder, "Come on, you tin can! Catch me if you can!" The machine hesitated, then turned and began to pursue him. Ethan sprinted down a corridor, his boots pounding against the stone floor. "Okay, Ethan," he muttered to himself. "You've outrun angry mercenaries, hostile wildlife, and your ex's dad. You can outrun one overpowered murder bot." He ducked into a side passage, glancing back to see the machine gaining on him. Its movements were eerily fluid, its energy weapon charging for another shot. "Yup, definitely worse than the ex's dad," he said, panting. Up ahead, he spotted a cluster of glowing glyphs on the wall. An idea sparked in his mind, a terrible, reckless idea, but it was better than nothing. Ethan skidded to a stop and slammed his hand against the glyphs, hoping they were some kind of control panel. "All right, space ruins," he said. "Time to show me some love." The glyphs flared to life, and the corridor behind him began to shift. Stone walls slid into place, cutting off the machine's path. Ethan let out a breath of relief, leaning against the wall. Well, that worked better than expected. The sound of footsteps made him turn, and he saw Virelin approaching, her expression a mix of relief and exasperation. "You are reckless," she said. "Reckless, maybe," Ethan replied with a grin, "but I'm still alive." Virelin shook her head, but there was a hint of a smile on her lips. "Come, we must return to the core. The convergence waits for no one." As they made their way back, Ethan couldn't help but wonder if this was just the beginning of the chaos to come. One thing was certain, the universe wasn't going to save itself. The core pulsed with chaotic energy, its crystalline structure flickering like a dying star. Ethan stood at the edge of the central chamber, gripping the etheric strands Virelin had handed him. They thrummed in his hands, alive and unpredictable, like snakes ready to strike. "So, let me get this straight," Ethan said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "I've got to, what? Weave the threads back together to stop the universe from imploding?" Virelin, perched on a pedestal near the core, nodded solemnly. "Not just weave them. Align them with the convergence. It requires balance, precision, and intent." "Right. Balance, precision, intent," Ethan muttered, pacing. "I'm great at all those things. Just look at my track record of crashing ships and dodging angry murder bots." Virelin raised an elegant brow. "Your sarcasm is noted, but sarcasm will not save the galaxy." He stopped pacing and threw her a mock salute. "Aye, Captain. No sarcasm. Just blind optimism and a total lack of a plan." Virelin's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile, but it quickly faded as the core let out a low, mournful hum. The vibrations rippled through the floor, making Ethan stagger. "Time is running out," she said. "The convergence is upon us." Ethan took a deep breath, then turned back to the core. The strands in his hands pulsed rhythmically, almost as if urging him forward. "All right, spaghetti strings," he said. "Let's do this." He stepped toward the core, its energy crackling in the air around him. The closer he got, the heavier the threads felt, as though the weight of the entire universe rested in his hands. "Ethan," Virelin called out, "remember, the threads will reflect your inner state. If you let doubt or fear control you, they'll smack me in the face again." "I got it," he interrupted, offering her a quick grin. Despite his bravado, Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a chosen one. He was just a guy who wanted to go home. And yet, here he was, standing at the center of an ancient alien ruin, holding the fate of the galaxy in his hands. He reached the core and closed his eyes, focusing on the threads. They responded immediately, wrapping around his arms and shoulders, connecting him to the swirling energy within the crystalline structure. The world around him shifted. He was no longer in the chamber, but in a vast, endless expanse of light and sound. Threads stretched out in all directions, intertwining and unraveling in a chaotic dance. "Whoa," Ethan breathed. "This is a lot." A familiar voice echoed in his mind. "Focus, Ethan." "Yeah, sure, focus," he muttered. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one swimming in cosmic spaghetti." Still, he took another deep breath and reached out to the threads. They shivered at his touch, resisting at first, then slowly bending to his will. He began to weave, his movements clumsy at first, but gradually growing more confident. The threads pulsed in time with his heartbeat, their vibrations resonating through his entire being. As he worked, memories surfaced. His time in the military, his friendships, his mistakes and losses. For the first time, he saw those moments not as random events, but as pieces of a larger tapestry, threads that had led him to this moment. "You're doing well," Varellan's voice said, softer now. "Don't jinx it," Ethan replied, though he couldn't help but smile. The threads began to align, their chaotic energy settling into a harmonious rhythm. The light around him grew brighter, warmer, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. But just as he reached the final threads, a dark presence surged into the expanse. Ethan froze as a shadowy figure emerged, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. "Oh, come on," he groaned. "I thought we were done with the boss battles." The figure spoke, its voice a low, guttural growl. "You cannot stop the unraveling. The convergence will bring only destruction." "Yeah, well, that's not really my thing," Ethan said, gripping the threads tighter. "I'm more of a save-the-day kind of guy." The shadow lunged at him, but Ethan raised the threads, using them as a barrier. The two forces clashed, sending shockwaves through the expanse. "Ethan, focus!" Varellan's voice shouted. "I'm focusing!" he shouted back, gritting his teeth. The threads vibrated wildly in his hands, threatening to snap. Ethan closed his eyes, shutting out the shadow's presence and focusing on the light within the threads. He thought of the people he wanted to protect, the galaxy he wanted to save. He thought of Varellan, her unyielding faith in him despite his flaws. And then with a final surge of determination, he wove the last threads together. The light around him exploded, engulfing the shadow and filling the expanse with warmth and harmony. Ethan felt a deep, resonant hum in his chest, as if the universe itself was singing. When he opened his eyes, he was back in the chamber. The core glowed brightly, its energy calm and steady. "You did it," Varellan said, her voice filled with awe. Ethan stumbled, his legs feeling like jelly. "Yeah, but I don't think I'm cut out for a career in cosmic knitting." Varellan laughed softly, the sound a balm to his frazzled nerves. As the ruins began to settle, Ethan looked around, a strange sense of peace washing over him. "So what now?" he asked. Varellan stepped closer, her gaze thoughtful. "The threads are restored, but their future is unwritten. What comes next is up to us." Ethan smirked. "Well, as long as it doesn't involve more murder bots or glowing spaghetti, I'm in." Varellan extended her hand, and Ethan took it without hesitation. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. As they left the chamber, the ruins seemed brighter, more alive, as if the threads themselves were celebrating their triumph. Ethan glanced at Varellan. "So, about that prophecy, do I get a medal or something? Maybe a statue?" "Ethan, savior of the galaxy. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" Varellan chuckled, shaking her head. "You are insufferable." "Yeah," Ethan said, grinning, "but I'm your kind of insufferable." And as they stepped into the light of a new dawn, Ethan couldn't help but feel that for once, the universe was exactly as it should be.